Imagine applying for a mortgage, and a machine just denies your application in like zero point 0.4 seconds,
Oh man, that is brutal.
right? Or uh, say you're standing at a busy crosswalk. You're agonizing over whether to step in and help a stranger who dropped their groceries, but you just completely freeze up.
Which, happens to pretty much all of us.
Exactly. And those two moments, they feel entirely unrelated, right? I mean, one is this massive technological black box, and the other is just an awkward social interaction on a Tuesday morning. But they're actually driven by the exact same invisible machinery.
The hidden architecture of our daily lives.
Yeah.
We navigate this deeply interconnected world every single day, but most of us are essentially, well, we're driving a car with the hood welded shut. We know how to press the pedals, but we have absolutely no idea how the engine works or, why it suddenly stalls.
And trying to pry that hood open can feel completely paralyzing. But that is our mission today for you, the listener. We are going to decode those massive humming systems operating all around us.
Break it all down.
Yep. And we're drawing our roadmap today from a brand new source. It literally just published this morning, April 30th, 2026. It's titled Civics for a Connected World, Thinking About Society, Politics, Economics, and Ethics in Your Own Words.
It's a really comprehensive text.
It really is. And I promise you, by the time we finish this deep dive, abstract concepts like globalization or civic duty, they aren't going to feel like an audio textbook. They're going to feel like a visible, manageable set of gears that you interact with every single day.
Because, the most dangerous misconception we carry around is the idea that these vast systems are just purely academic. There is this pervasive myth of someone else's problem.
No, for sure.
We look at a headline about demographic shifts, aging populations, plummeting birth rates, and we think, well, that's an issue for nursing homes or young parents.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because treating society like a collection of isolated islands is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the plumbing.
The plumbing, I like that.
Yeah, think of social infrastructure like the invisible plumbing in your house. You never think about the pipes hidden behind the drywall when you turn on the tap to brush your teeth.
Right. You just expect the water pressure to be there.
Exactly. But those pipes dictate every single aspect of how you live.
And when we look at demographic collapse through that plumbing analogy, the water pressure is dropping for everyone. An aging population completely rewires the economy.
Because there are fewer people working.
Exactly. The mechanism here is the dependency ratio. As the pool of working-age people shrinks, the tax base just evaporates. Suddenly, local governments have to make these impossible choices.
Like what to fund.
Yeah. Do they pave the roads, or do they fund the ballooning healthcare infrastructure required for the elderly? That dictates the future of your own taxes, the severity of labor shortages at the businesses you rely on, and, of course, the viability of your own Social Security.
So it literally is your plumbing.
It is absolutely your plumbing.
Which brings us to the digital plumbing, which is, honestly, even more invisible. When we use AI tools or scroll through social media, we tend to view them as private tools, like a calculator.
Right.
But the authors argue they are actually public squares.
And the underlying mechanism of AI is where this gets really critical. A neural network doesn't actually reason. It just recognizes patterns in historical data.
Wait, so it just copies what we've already done?
Pretty much. So if an AI is tasked with screening resumes, and it learns from 10 years of human hiring decisions where managers subconsciously favored certain demographics,
It just copies that bias.
it codifies that bias. It institutionalizes human prejudice, but hides it behind this veneer of mathematical objectivity. The developer might not have programmed it to be biased, but the machine ingested the flaws of the society that built it.
And because it's a machine, there's this total lack of accountability. We just assume it's neutral. And, we see a similar structural flaw with social media algorithms. They aren't designed to inform you. They are optimized for engagement.
To keep you on the app.
Exactly. They map human psychology and realize that outrage and validation keep you scrolling. So the algorithm builds an information bubble around you, constantly feeding you content that reinforces your pre-existing worldview.
Which fundamentally fractures democratic discussion. If the algorithms optimize for different realities based on what keeps each user clicking, you and your neighbor are no longer operating with the same basic set of facts.
You literally can't agree on reality.
Right. You can't debate how to fix a community problem if one of you lives in a digital ecosystem that claims the problem doesn't even exist. The shared reality just breaks down.
Speaking of things breaking down, we have to look at the physical resources we're consuming while we scroll on those phones. The current economic model is basically Take, make, use, and throw away. But away is a magical place that doesn't actually exist.
The material doesn't just vanish. The environmental costs, the resource depletion, the toxic runoff, they eventually leak back into the main water supply.
Which is why the book talks about the circular economy, right?
Yeah, that shift is a structural necessity, not just an environmental slogan. It requires completely rethinking the life cycle of a product. It means designing a smartphone so the battery can actually be replaced rather than gluing it shut to force a new purchase.
Oh, I hate that they do that.
Same. It's about designing systems where resources are continuously repaired and looped back into production.
Which requires systemic change, not just, me remembering to use a paper straw. Treating massive structural issues as individual failures is a trap.
It really is.
And just to be clear, we are just conveying the ideas in the source material here, not endorsing a specific political stance. But the book argues that if we look at poverty or lack of digital literacy and declare, well, that person just didn't work hard enough, we give ourselves a very convenient excuse to ignore the broken plumbing.
What's fascinating here is how the text argues that treating systemic issues as purely individual failures allows society to completely sidestep things like the unequal funding of public schools or the lack of broadband infrastructure in rural areas.
Individual effort still matters, though.
Individual effort is incredibly important, but a functional society has to examine the conditions that shape a person's starting line.
But here is where the local plumbing connects to the global main. If an algorithm built in Silicon Valley is radicalizing a teenager in Tokyo whose laws apply, carbon emissions don't stop at customs.
No, they don't.
We have these massively interconnected domestic issues, but they spill over into an international arena that has no central authority.
Because the fundamental reality of international society is anarchy.
Anarchy, like riots in the streets.
No, not in the sense of chaos, but literal anarchy, the absence of a ruler. There is no world government, there is no global police force, and there is no world parliament. The globe is divided into sovereign states, meaning each country has ultimate authority over its own territory.
So how do you manage a global crisis like a viral pandemic or climate change when every single country is essentially its own boss?
Through international law, treaties, and diplomacy, because states cannot be forced into compliance by a higher power, they have to negotiate.
Enter the UN.
Enter the UN. Institutions like the United Nations exist to provide a forum for that friction. But the architecture of the UN is deeply constrained by this sovereign reality. In the General Assembly, every state gets one vote, which is great for setting norms. But the real power lies in the Security Council.
Right, and the Security Council is where things get really controversial. You have permanent members who hold veto power. If just one of those superpowers disagrees, the entire UN apparatus can be paralyzed, even in the middle of a severe, escalating crisis.
Exactly. It's a major bottleneck.
I have to push back here, though. If there is no world police force to arrest a state leader, and the primary global institution can be completely blocked by a single veto, isn't international law just a polite suggestion?
That's a very common critique.
Like, if a powerful country can just ignore a treaty when it becomes inconvenient, why does anyone follow the rules at all?
That is the core paradox of global politics. But they follow the rules because of a mechanism we use every day: reputation and mutual self-interest. Think about international relations like a complex market.
Okay, I'm with you.
States need stability. They need reliable trade routes to feed their populations. They need foreign investment. If a state consistently violates treaties or acts unpredictably, its reputation becomes toxic. Other countries stop doing business with them, tariffs go up, and alliances crumble.
Ah, I see. It's like traffic laws at 3 a.m. Even if you know there isn't a cop for miles, you generally still stop at the red light.
Most people do, yeah.
Not because you fear immediate arrest, but because you need the whole intersection system to remain predictable so you don't get T-boned. You need the baseline order to get to your destination safely.
That baseline order is the foundation of peace. But we have to be very precise about what peace actually means. The source text draws a massive distinction between negative peace and positive peace. Negative peace is simply the absence of war. The guns are quiet, the bombs aren't falling.
Which is obviously the baseline requirement. You can't really build a society in a war zone.
Absolutely. But negative peace is entirely insufficient. Imagine a society ruled by a brutal dictator. There is no active civil war, but half the population lives in extreme poverty, there is systemic discrimination, and citizens disappear for speaking out.
Wow, yeah.
That is negative peace maintained by structural violence. Positive peace, on the other hand, is the presence of human dignity. It is a society where people have actual security, access to health care, and the freedom to participate without fear.
And that reframes how we look at national security. The traditional view is all about guarding the borders, buying fighter jets, building walls. But the concept of human security flips the lens. It doesn't ask if the border is secure, it asks if the human beings inside that border are secure.
Exactly. Are they safe from starvation? Are they safe from preventable diseases? Are they safe from the devastating impacts of a collapsing local environment?
Right.
A state can have a massive undefeated military, but if its citizens are constantly vulnerable to economic ruin or environmental disaster, that state has failed to provide human security.
Man, we are swimming in incredibly heavy waters here. AI bias, demographic collapse, the limits of the UN, structural violence. If you're listening to this, it is entirely normal to feel a sense of information overload right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot.
But this is exactly where we pivot. We need a practical framework to decode all this data so it doesn't just wash over us.
To navigate these systems, we have to develop a civic toolkit. And the foundational tool here is learning to identify value conflicts.
Value conflicts.
Yeah. When we watch the news, debates are almost always framed as a battle between good and evil. But if you look closely at the mechanics of a complex issue, it is almost never good versus evil. It is a clash between two competing goods.
Take the debate over installing facial recognition security cameras in a city plaza. The conflict isn't between people who love crime and people who hate crime.
No, of course not.
It's a value conflict between public safety and personal privacy. Both of those values are essential for a free society. Or look at regulating social media platforms. You have the value of freedom of expression colliding head-on with the value of protecting human dignity from coordinated harassment.
If you only acknowledge one side of the value conflict, you are missing the actual friction of the debate.
Yeah.
You can't engineer a solution if you refuse to see the competing value. And another crucial tool for engineering solutions is understanding the mechanics of equality.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because equality sounds so simple until you actually try to apply it. The framework makes a vital distinction between formal equality and substantive equality.
This is a great concept.
To use an analogy, let's say I am in charge of outfitting a sports team, and in the name of equality, I hand every single player the exact same pair of size 9 shoes. That is formal equality. Everyone received the exact same treatment. But I am a size 12.
Ouch.
Right? So formal equality basically means I am losing a few toes if I try to play.
Formal equality is treating everyone exactly the same under the law. It is a crucial starting point. I mean, we need laws that do not actively discriminate. But substantive equality recognizes the reality of the size 12 foot.
It recognizes the differences.
Yes, it recognizes that different people face different historical and structural barriers. Building a ramp at a public library isn't giving wheelchair users an unfair special advantage. It is providing substantive equality so they can actually access the same books as the person walking up the stairs.
It's acknowledging the starting line. And as we navigate the news and evaluate arguments around these topics, we need a filter. The framework gives us a very clean three-part formula for cutting through the rhetoric: claim, reason, and example.
This raises an important question about how we consume information. When a politician or a pundit is speaking, break down what they are actually saying. What is their core claim? What is the logical reason they are providing to support it? And what concrete, real-world example proves the reason?
And if they don't have all three,
If they have a passionate claim but no grounded example, the argument falls apart.
the same rigor applies to reading data too. A number by itself is essentially meaningless. You have to look for change over time, and you have to make comparisons. And most importantly, avoid the classic trap, assuming that just because two trends happen at the same time, one caused the other.
Right. Correlation is not causation,
Exactly.
which transforms how you consume the morning headlines. Instead of passively absorbing panic, you can stop and interrogate the text. Whose rights are actually involved here? What invisible rule or system is causing the friction? What values are currently colliding?
Okay, so we've built this analytical toolkit. We understand value conflicts, structural barriers, and international law. But how does this actually apply to an ordinary Tuesday? Because social participation sounds like something reserved for elected officials or like activists with megaphones.
That is the most empowering part of this entire framework. It demystifies participation down to 4 micro steps. Notice, think, speak, act. There is a brilliant case study in the text used to illustrate this, involving a high school student named Rina Segusa.
I found this story incredibly relatable. So Rena is standing at a chaotic, fast-paced intersection on her way to school. The pedestrian light turns green, and she notices an elderly man with a cane struggling to make it across the wide street. He's moving slowly, the light starts flashing red, and the cars are aggressively inching forward.
Rena experiences what psychologists call the bystander effect. She wants to help, but she hesitates. She worries that if she steps into the crosswalk, she might hold up traffic or embarrass the man or just make the situation super awkward.
The social friction paralyzes her.
Exactly. By the time she decides to move, someone else has helped the man across. Rena walks to school feeling this heavy, quiet guilt.
The paralysis of overthinking. We have all been there. But later, in her civics class, her teacher reframes the entire experience. The teacher points out that simply noticing the failure of the intersection is the first step of participation. Rena didn't just put her headphones in and ignore the world. She registered that the physical plumbing of the public space was failing a citizen.
And that validation shifts her from passive guilt to active curiosity. She moves to the think phase. Rena returns to that same intersection over the next few mornings and starts collecting data.
Like a mini investigation.
Yeah. She times the pedestrian lights. She observes how bicycles crowd the curb, forcing pedestrians into narrow choke points. She documents how the space becomes dangerously restrictive on rainy days when umbrellas take up more volume.
She takes an invisible structural problem and makes it visible. Then she moves to speak. She takes her data and presents it to her class, articulating how the city planners prioritize the speed of cars over the substantive equality of pedestrians.
And that analytical process rewires her confidence completely. A few weeks later, she's at the same crossing. The light turns green, the crowd surges, and a mother is suddenly struggling to fix her toddler's loose shoe strap right in the middle of the crosswalk.
Oh, high-stress situation.
Right. But this time, Rena doesn't analyze the social awkwardness. She moves to the act phase. She calmly stops her bicycle, creates a physical buffer against the flow of foot traffic, and says, "We will stop for a moment."
It is a microscopic action. She didn't pass a law or redesign the intersection. But for 10 seconds, she altered the reality of that public space.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Rena's story proves that society isn't just something that happens in parliament buildings or at the UN Security Council. Society is happening in the crosswalks. It is a continuous living network.
And it extends to the supermarket, too. Every time you buy a product, you're casting an economic vote. A profoundly cheap T-shirt is usually cheap because the environmental destruction or the exploitative labor conditions are neatly hidden from the price tag.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right. But your money is a direct signal of what kind of supply chain you're willing to tolerate.
The same applies to your job. Work is not just a mechanism to extract a paycheck. It connects you to the broader network. The delivery driver, the software engineer, the nurse, the teacher, every job is a node that sustains the daily life of someone else in the system.
So what does this all mean? It means you do not need a 50-page policy proposal to participate in society. You don't need a PhD in international relations. You just need to refuse to be indifferent to the machinery around you. You just have to notice the pipes.
Participation begins with observation. Once you see the systems, the algorithms, the supply chains, the value conflicts, you can never unsee them. And that awareness is a profound form of power.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by dismantling the myth of someone else's problem and exposing the plumbing of demographic shifts and AI bias. We navigated the anarchic reality of sovereign states and the limits of the UN.
It's been a journey.
It really has. We built a toolkit to decode the news using value conflicts and substantive equality, and we brought it all the way down to the profound power of noticing an unfair crosswalk.
Because this kind of systemic knowledge isn't just academic trivia. It acts as a shield. It protects you from being manipulated by algorithmic outrage. It inoculates you against overly simplistic political rhetoric, and it dispels that suffocating feeling of powerlessness in a complex world.
It is a lens that brings the blur of modern life into sharp focus. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about interconnected systems crossing physical borders, how carbon emissions or cyber threats don't stop at customs lines. But the most profound border these systems cross is time. Yeah, think about the people who will be born 50 years from now. They cannot vote in our current elections. They cannot lobby our governments. They cannot post on our social media. And they certainly do not have a seat at the UN Security Council. Yet because of the permanence of the digital and environmental infrastructure we are deploying right now, they will inherit the exact consequences of the systems we normalize today. The ultimate someone else's problem is the future. So what invisible vote are you casting for them today through your habits, your attention, and the things you choose to notice?